All right, everybody, welcome in. It's me, former NFL scout for the Philadelphia Eagles, John Middlekauff, as we get ready for close to an hour of breakdown of college football, some thoughts on various coaches in the league who are on the definite hot seat. But we start, John, with San Francisco and Philly. There were two games this weekend that I loved. I loved the Niners and I loved the Lions. So let's start with San Francisco and Philadelphia. I thought, at least in the first half, it felt like your classic matchup of great teams. Playmakers, speed, strength, coaching, kind of the class of the NFC. But I do wonder if that emotional game with a lot of snaps for the Eagles defense last week against Buffalo, and that was one of the reasons I like San Francisco. At this time of the year, John, every day counts for rest. So the Niners get several days rest. The Eagles play an especially long game against Buffalo. Defense is on the field, and I think they looked absolutely worn down in the second half defensively. That was my take.
Yeah, I thought early on, that place, I've been to a lot of games there, was rocking, and the quarterback was a little shaky. The Eagles came ready to play, which was shocking. I thought it'd be the other way around. The Niners had talked a lot. Like you said, they had been off since Thanksgiving. I thought by about midway through that second quarter, the Niners were really leaning on them. You could tell that defensive line was gassed. The Eagles' defense isn't very good. Their linebackers are decimated with injuries. They're on like their third string nickel corner. They had to trade for a safety. And the 49ers, from Ayuk to obviously Debo, who has been running his mouth for 9 months. And listen, I got no problem. In an individual sport, you're Conor McGregor, you're Tiger Woods, you're whatever, you run your mouth. Only you have to back it up. Debo can back it up. I was nervous. Some other guys on the team, the right tackle trying to block Reddick. It didn't matter. Debo dominated that game. Kittle was awesome. McCaffrey was flying around. They came ready to play. But most importantly, Colin, in solidarity with the quarterback, how about that MVP-type performance from Brock Purdy? After starting the game 0-4, where it's just, he looked shaky.
Yeah.
19 of 23 the rest of the game, and just throwing dots, keeping plays alive with his legs, keeping his eyes downfield. How about the run he had where he broke the tackle? I'm not saying the guy's the MVP, but if he's not in the discussion, we're all not watching football. He was brilliant today.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've said, let's contextualize it. Shanahan's a brilliant play caller, and the weapons are insane. Literally, Kittle will be a Hall of Famer. Trent Williams a Hall of Famer. McCaffrey should be a Hall of Famer. And if Debo stays healthy for 4 more years, people will talk about him as a Hall of Famer. That's just on the offense. But I do believe that there are just certain throws that C.J. Stroud makes, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a franchise quarterback that Kenny Pickett can't make, right? And so there are throws. Purdy will make about 3 throws a game, and he'll let go of that puppy before the receiver breaks, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's a franchise. And for the record, I don't see Justin Fields make those. I don't see him as an anticipation thrower. So, and it's not a knock. I don't see Zach Wilson make those. A lot of this stuff is innate. And, years ago, Bill Parcells had a rule. No celebrity quarterbacks, which forget that now with NIL. They're going to be celebrities. Yeah. But I want 3 years of starting. And I remember when I really noticed this, I covered Akili Smith at Oregon, and I loved the way he threw the ball. But he was like a 1-year starter, and he went to the NFL, and he just did not have enough reps. He just did not have enough reps. He was overwhelmed. And it wasn't because he was a good kid. He could move. He had a hell of an arm. He had a baseball arm, but he just didn't have enough starts. And, the NFL's impatient. By year 2, like if you don't, they're not sitting around waiting for you as everybody's going to lose their job. I think a lot of this with Purdy is he came in high school, college. He had like 8 straight years of snaps. He's just fun. He is just cognitively ready to play football.
For sure. But I also think he's really good. He was the Arizona High School Player of the Year. Really good recruiting base. In his second year starting, he was the second team all Big 12 guy behind Jalen Hurts. For the next 2 years, he was a first teamer. And he's come in on this team, and he's clearly better than anything Jimmy brought to the table. And Jimmy was pretty good, not the version we've seen these last couple years. The other thing is, wouldn't you say probably the best average arm quarterback over the last probably couple decades was like Drew Brees?
Yeah.
And listen, you were right on Baker Mayfield. I personally thought he could become that. Clearly, he never sniffed that. I actually think this guy has a lot of those traits in the pocket, but he also has, unlike Drew. Now, Drew was much more accomplished as a passer coming out of college. But this guy clearly is comfortable to go into an environment like that. Dreary day, Philly, and I get they were running out of gas, and the Niners were favored for a reason. But that kid was dominant, just in terms of accuracy. And what's the key if you're going to play with really good players? Put it on them because they're like, well, they got a lot of yards after the catch. Well, he hits them in stride. The ball to McCaffrey down the middle, a couple balls to Debo, a couple balls to Kittle. And his athleticism, I think his 10-yard split is pretty much the same time as Christian McCaffrey. So he's not Lamar Jackson or Cam Newton down the field as a runner. But, in those little bursts, he can keep plays alive a lot like Jalen, right? And that's an underestimated part of his game that has taken the Niners to a whole nother level. Now, once they pulled away, it was not a fair fight because the Eagles, like you said, ran out of gas. But I also think you see, even if the Eagles had gas, let's face it, the Niners are a little better, right? Yeah. Fully healthy. And the Eagles they're not getting healthy guys in the secondary. Like Bradbury and Slay are their corners. And the way they use their number one wide receiver in Debo is not like an A.J. Brown. They don't just put him out there and say, cover him. Darius Slay would like that with a receiver. They're moving them all around. They're using them like a running back. Ayuk's a very shifty in and out of cuts, a lot like Devontae Smith, why nobody can cover him. And then you got Kittle, who is just one of the most unique players in the league to go on top of McCaffrey. So it's just a tough situation. It's a tough matchup for Philly.
Well, and here's the other thing. So I think we both felt strongly just on the extra time that this was really San Francisco's game. And you have these moments when Dallas went to San Francisco. San Francisco's the kind of team, the Eagles know it and the Cowboys know it. If you don't have your shit dialed in, you're in big trouble. They play downhill really fast. They're like Buffalo 3 years ago without the mistakes. You get all the avalanche, without the yard sale of skis flying everywhere. They're like a streamlined avalanche, and you just can't, and with all these weapons. But here's the one thing about Philadelphia I worry about is that Ferguson for the Cowboys now, Brandon Cooks are productive. CeeDee Lamb's a top 4 receiver in the league.
Yeah, big time.
Okay. And then you have Debo, Kittle, Brandon Ayuk's a special player. Even Jennings contributes. The Philly secondary is not getting better. They made a move at the trade deadline. It's bad. It's old. It's not getting better. Even Detroit, if you watch them today, because Goff usually has time because of that offensive line, and they run the ball really well. Jamison Williams now becoming more of a threat.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made with Philly. Their weakness is a real problem because we both like Goff more than people now. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Laporte, he's an incredible rookie.
Jesus.
So all of a sudden you start looking at Philly and you're like, oh, they don't match up necessarily well with the top 3 teams in the NFC.
Well, their key is they did not have to win today after they won the last 2 weeks. Now they're going to have to win this upcoming week against Dallas, right? And it's an enormous game. Their formula is going to be the D-line has to be elite. I mean, it has to be unstoppable. And it can be. Today, they were clearly running on fumes. That's why, let's face it, today, through everything, I mean, McCarthy, I'm sure, feet up, eating a sandwich at home with a big smile on his face because he has the opportunity now at home. The Niners took care of business. The Niners now play Seattle. All of a sudden, if Dallas wins and the 49ers wins, the Eagles are kind of looking up. I'm with you. You got to be able to it's not like Ambry Thomas and Lenore or Richard Sherman and Darrelle Revis in their prime, but they're functional players. And the main difference between the Eagles and the Niners, because both of them have countless D linemen that every team would want, it's the linebackers. I mean, Fred Warner is a dominant player. Greenlaw, who got in a fight with Dom on the sideline, is probably the best number 2 linebacker. But even when those guys, there was a moment when Greenlaw got tossed and Fred's shoe came off, the Niners have 2 other backups who are solid. I mean, the Eagles linebackers are Kyle Shanahan this is why Debo and those guys were talking so much shit all week. They don't think that all those guys have a chance to handle their speed, their physicality.
And they don't.
And once they took a deep breath and just kind of handled the crowd and just kind of the wetness and just everything that the link brings, it was a rout. They just ran circles around them, and that's for sure. Now, their D linemen, if they play at an elite level, can just cause so much havoc, and their offense has to be awesome. Goddard's got to come back. You know, A.J. Brown had some big-time moments. Devontae. Their offense is really special, and that's why they've won a lot of these games, right? Because it's essentially been shootouts in the second half. Harder to have shootouts with the 49ers, I think, because their defense, they're just not really going to play in a 38-35 type game.
Yeah, the best one-possession win teams over the last several years have been Philadelphia. It caught up with them today. Minnesota last year caught up with them. There was a Cowboy team and a Seahawk team over the last 3 or 4 years, and it caught up with them. You just can't. Eventually, you can't get outgained like Philly had 4 straight games. Eventually, it just doesn't work that way. And so I kind of look at Philadelphia, and I think they'll play very well. In a weird way, they were best served to get their butt kicked because they'll come against Dallas. They'll play a great game.
Yeah, 100%.
They'll play a great game. But I do think there is a fundamental problem that they can only overcome with ball control offensively, which is their back 4, back 7. Linebackers are weak. Corners aren't great. They have one good safety. The only way to overcome that is with ball control. And that's it. And now they have the components to do that.
I think they also got to be really careful. And in fairness, their players, I mean, Slay's on the volume, high-level guy, Jalen, super high-level guy. Their coach can be really, really yappy, right? And not in a Bill Parcells, like, check the pelts on my wall yappy. It's like kind of annoying. And there's a level of, listen, Kyle Shanahan's going to scream at the refs, but he's not going to give the other team. He's an old school kind of Andy Reid, his dad. Like, it's not about, he doesn't want to get involved in the thing. And I do think their coaching staff, you got Sirianni screaming at people pregame. Listen, that works against the majority of opponents. It's not going to work against the Chiefs. Maybe it works a little bit against Dallas, but it's not going to work against the 49ers. It's more just X's and O's. We're going to hit you in the mouth, and we're going to be relentless. So all that stuff, that kind of typically feeds into Philly. Like they loved when Dom got tossed, and they feed off that stuff. The Niners they have proven that this core of guys have won so many games on the road. Went into Green Bay and won, went into Dallas and won. Like they're not going to be intimidated by difficult circuit. They easily could have won a couple years ago against the Rams, right? When Tart dropped the ball. So they go into these environments a lot like some great like NBA players, like the Curry group over the years. Like they're not intimidated. They might need a couple series to kind of gather themselves, but they're going to be okay. So the Eagles, it's going to be a scheme game versus them. Can you out-scheme them? Because all the other shit, like the Niners aren't going to be fazed by that crap. Can you out-think them? Can you out-call, like Andy Reid, can you out-call plays against whatever their looks are, offensively or defensively? And you saw today it wasn't really a fair fight. Now, like you said, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, a little gas. I think if you told me there was a rematch, I would expect a much better Philly effort. But I do think big picture, do they have, like, their head coach, he's not calling the plays on either side. He's just kind of screaming on the sideline. Like the 49ers guy is their play caller. Like it's him versus you. So that's a disadvantage for the Eagles.
Here's the other thing is I'm trying to think of a roster. Hufunga's injury, although painful, they can protect it with a good pass rush. I don't think there's been a roster as good as San Francisco since the Seahawks roster that won a Super Bowl but went to 2 straight. That roster just didn't that was such a good roster.
Yeah.
You're not really allowed to do that anymore. Again, Russell was on a rookie deal. The minute he wasn't, the roster wasn't good. Purdy's on a rookie deal. But I'm trying to think of a roster. I mean, I remember that Seattle team was so good that they went and just rented Percy Harvin, almost never used him as a toy. And then they went and got Cliff Averill, said, we'll bring another pass rusher in. You're like, that's a luxury of a rookie contract. You can't do that with a veteran quarterback. But I think this roster, I find myself rooting for San Francisco to win because it would be such a shame if this roster didn't at least want, like that Seattle roster, John, it was too damn good not to win a Super Bowl. It was just too good. It was just fundamentally too good. The Ravens roster with Dilfer. There's like 7 Hall of Famers. I grew up with the Steelers in the 70s. There were a couple Raider teams. You're like, the Cowboys, Jimmy Johnson roster. They need to win a Super Bowl. There's too many good players. I kind of feel like the best roster in the league is San Francisco. I'm thinking about second. With the emergence of Bland for the Cowboys at corner and Ferguson, the tight end, is Dallas the second best roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have a chance to prove it this upcoming week because they went toe-to-toe with them and they should have won that game. I think Philly's right there fully healthy, but they're just missing a ton of guys, and they got some guys that aren't coming back. And the Niners, the moment they lost a couple guys, they weren't the same. So this this sport, the margins are so thin. I mean, you saw Jalen all of a sudden get cracked. I start thinking, because the game was already over. Well, what about next week? What if he can't clear? That'd be a devastating. They're not going into Dallas to win with Mariota. So, yeah, right. The problem with Dallas is even if they win this upcoming game at home, like, how are you going to pick them in a big playoff game? I've seen them lose at home to the 49ers a couple years ago. Now, you would say that the cohesion with Mike and Dak and Dan Quinn and the group, they've been together longer. But there's an element where, and I picked them this year to start the season to win the division. And clearly they're damn good, right? I mean, to me, Detroit is on the lower tier beside these three teams, right? You know, the Niners, the Eagles, the Cowboys. And then I would put Detroit on another tier kind of by themselves. But it's just, you know, Dak is having a fantastic year, but do you truly trust him? I mean, even that Eagles game, stepping out of bounds, just little things. I mean, these are the little details of you'd be the number one seed, or you got to now win this game and then take care of business the rest of the year. They were the team this year that lost a game. Like, how do you lose to Arizona? How do you lose to Arizona? It's a Cowboy home game in Glendale. It's 80-20, your fans. So I like their roster, love their coaching staff, especially on defense. You got to give Mike credit. He's doing a great job. But I just have a hard time. And this is, like you said, with the Niners. Their players have not won a championship level, but they have championship character deep in them. I've seen them in the big moments. From Debo to Kittle to Trent to Fred to Nick to Eric Armstead. Like, they're wired. Like, they might lose, but it's going to be because you beat them, not because they screw up or they're not good enough. Yeah. And I don't know about Dallas. They have the talent. You know, and I think the Bland guy's an incredible story. Didn't go to the combine, now setting records of pick sixes, and just they do. For everyone that talks shit about Jerry, right? He's a little bit of a wild card. How good are they as a personnel team? You know, we anoint John Lynch and Howie, like Jerry's every bit their equal. And I know he's not picking evaluating the fifth rounders, but he's technically their GM, so he's empowering people. They build a team that goes toe to toe with these two teams. I know they lost to the 49ers big in the regular season, but they easily could have beat them in the playoffs last year. So, yeah, I'm not going to I think Dallas could easily win this week. Hell, I might pick them by the end of the week. But I'm still not going to feel confident because, Colin, here's what's going to happen. If, let's say, they don't win the division, they're going to destroy the Falcons or the Bucks or whoever the hell wins that worthless division. And we're going to be like, oh, Dallas, you know, Dak just threw 4 touchdowns, and it happened last year, and then they were gone the next round. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do it, get over the hump. I just have a hard time believing until they do. I'm not going to pick them to do it until they do it, and I'll just be wrong.
I wrote a list today, so we'll pivot to this, and I don't know how much time we should give it. But, you know, McVay and Shanahan still have to be considered young coaches. But we have, so let's say the young coaches that we don't buy. Dennis Allen of the Saints, Brandon Staley of the Chargers, I think are both going to lose their job. I'm undecided on Robert Saleh and Arthur Smith. But I'm going to give you some young offensive coaches. My bad. I'm going to give you some young coaches. We've got a lot of good young coaches in this league. Shane Steichen has Indy battling for a playoff. That is insane in the AFC.
They're 7-5.
Incredible. D'Amico Ryan at Houston. I watched that game today. So I mean, they just, you have to earn every yard against them. Every freaking yard. Sirianni, McVay, Shanahan. I think Stefanski, Joe Flacco was actually good today. That's insane. Kevin O'Connell, Minnesota. Mike McDaniel, Miami. Matt LaFleur's more than solid Green Bay. Jordan Love has shown absolute growth. And Zach Taylor, when Joe Burrow's upright, wins a lot of games. We have got some really good coaches. And I was thinking about this. So I watched a lot of games today. I want to talk Rams-Browns. So the Rams won this game. This was viewed as a 5 to 6 win team. The offensive line, you've had left tackles playing right guard. They've had major injuries. They lost Kyron Williams, their excellent running back, for 4 to 5 weeks. Cooper Kupp's never healthy. Puka Nacua got hurt in the game. He's a rookie. This defense is Aaron Donald and kids. Between Raheem Morris, the defensive coordinator, and Sean McVay, of all these young coaches, D'Amico Ryans, to me, is the star defensively. I think this is McVay's best year. John, I watched Stafford today, and I'm like, they got this kid, Demarcus Robinson, this bounce around the league guy, made big plays today. Part of great coaching, and you know this as a former scout, is being able to take marginal players and make them productive. right? Like Brady helped do that in New England for years. Yeah. Belichick did that. He would take marginal linebackers and they would become fairly forceful. The Rams are vying for a playoff team with Seattle sinking. We have a real chance for the Rams to make the playoffs. I mean, I think it's a McVay story.
I don't think they're vying, Colin. I mean, look at the way it's all breaking. I think they're going to make it. They're 6-6. Look at their schedule. I see some Giants on there. I see some Cardinals. They got the Ravens coming up. But other than that, and who knows, Niners week 17 might not matter. I think I might have been one of the reasons. I remember you in the offseason loved the Rams. And I thought you were nuts. Like the Rams, they're going to be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. Like you said, part of coaching is getting average guys to overachieve. His team is all average guys. It's not like he only has a couple guys. You remove Aaron Donald and Matt Stafford, it's a bunch of people no one had heard of coming into the season. I mean, to be 6-6, like you watch Pete Carroll, they're 6-6. They have high-end players. Think how many guys the Niners, the Eagles, the Cowboys would love. DK, Witherspoon, the tackles have been banged up, but they would take those guys. The Seattle has impact, elite, blue chip, premium guys. Jackson Smith. You watch this Rams team, like, who are these guys? What is he doing? And I think one theory I've had for a long time, and I think that a lot of the young Belichick guys have consistently failed. And the number one thing you always hear is like they are just assholes relentlessly. Yeah. And I think you could do that, society, 70s, 80s, 90s, football, individuals could handle it much more. I think you've seen a major shift. College as well. Like you talk to people around Saban, he's lightened up a lot. You have to change with the people. And what do a lot of these young coaches have? Well, they can they're not that much older than the guys, right? If you're early 40s, well, you're talking to a guy that's 30, right? And I think a lot of these Patriot guys, because they've learned from Bill, well, Tom is as old as a lot of these guys, so he could kind of handle it. Well, you're dealing now with a 25-year-old Puka Nacua. You got to treat him a little differently than the guy you would have treated in 1993 that played for Bill Parcells or Jimmy Johnson, right? Because you hear some of these stories, you talk to these guys, it wasn't always pleasant. And it's football. You still get yelled at and held to a high standard, and there's discipline when you walk in the building. But I think if you watch a lot of these guys conduct themselves, like Sirianni acts like an idiot sometimes, like to the other team, but he treats his players very well. He's a very, I would say, optimism. I would say historically football coaches are just naturally pretty pessimistic and be kind of dark and angry, just the nature of the job. I think that's changed a lot with some of these younger guys that tend to be more uplifters and be more optimistic and just to be fun-loving is probably the wrong way to put it, but there's just an area you kind of want to be around these guys.
Well, and I think you really hit on it. I've talked to a couple of people. Logan Ryan, the NFL player, talked about this, is that Eric Mangini is one of the few Belichick guys that everybody loved being around. That a lot of his guys, Patricia, Joe Judge, Bill O'Brien, they're tough guys. Charlie Weiss, they're hard on people.
Flores, a younger guy, but he's angry. He's edgy.
Yeah, and I think McVay's got Raheem Morris, Kevin O'Connell. There's a spirit like, how lucky are we?
Look at D'Amico. I mean, when you just want to hang out with D'Amico, there's an aura around him. He just like glows. And he's been like that. I was around him as a player. He was like a team captain as a rookie. Like some guys just haven't, and I think he's a great example.
Let's talk about that. Let's pivot to the Houston win over Denver. So D'Amico Ryans. My takeaway, it's funny. There's the old stat that you hear this all the time by analytic mavens. They say winning is not a quarterback stat, which is nonsense, because if you put Davis Mills starting for Houston instead of CJ Stroud, the entire roster stays the same. They're a 2-win team. Stroud made 2 throws today under duress that he's just innately accurate. There was he's running across his body and he flips something up. And I'm like, people that'll never show up in the box score. People have no idea how hard it is to be in a full sprint left. A guy's on you, throw it to a receiver moving right to left. But D'Amico's demeanor on the sideline, there's no barking. He is genuinely happy when Texan players, he's not mad when they fail. My wife always says, you're right or you're learning. Like, get out of wrong. You're figuring it out. So D'Amico, when I watch Houston today, because I think Denver's a pretty decent team now. That win is more significant than people think. Denver was basically bailing water all day to stay close.
I actually think him and Robert Saleh are very similar guys. One just has a quarterback and the other does not. I mean, that helps a lot. I mean, Denver, the team that has played lately is not the team that gave up 70 points. I mean, that defense was peppering them. Listen, it got weird there for a couple of years. It was really ugly with the Deshaun situation. But I wrote down today, they have a star rocket ship coach. They have a quarterback that just, I don't know, statistically, when it's all said and done, where he's going to rank relative to all the rookies ever in the history of the league. It's going to be up there. But the eye test, he is clearly one of the most special rookie quarterbacks we've seen.
No question.
Will Anderson, a little like Aiden Hutchinson, people question like how high was the ceiling? Could he be Myles Garrett and Nick Bosa? I don't know. But Will Anderson is the type human one you build around, and clearly he's pretty damn good. You don't go to be a team captain in Alabama for a couple of years without being a badass. So they have a coach, they have a quarterback, they have a pass rusher. Remember a couple of years ago when they took the kid from LSU, Stingley, over Sauce Gardner? Everyone's like, oh, how are they doing this? Sauce can't miss. Stingley sure looks better to me than Sauce Gardner. Sauce won't tackle me or you. Stingley looks he's more of a fluid elite athlete, like a Revis type. He looks fantastic. So they have a star corner. They have a really good left tackle. The rookie wide receiver looked like he had a bad injury, got carted off, but that kid's a stud. This team today, listen, they've had some impressive wins. But the way it was going, Jimmy Ward's a good example. DeMeco around Jimmy, he no longer was a starter in San Francisco, but he was a team captain level, just winning player, high level guy. When the Niners drafted Trey Lance, they put his locker next to Jimmy Ward because they wanted him to follow him, the way he acted, the way he operated. Well, what did DeMeco do? That's who he brought and who made the game winning play, but who obviously I would imagine Stingley's growth. He's around that guy every day. So you get some young building blocks who are clearly high character, good guys. You have a coach that everyone's loved for 15 years as a player, let alone as a coach. I mean, that guy, his rise as a coach, him and Vrabel are just like rocket ships. Like they went from position coaches to head coaches before you could even blink. And then within a couple of years, you're like, God, this guy probably should have been a head coach faster. Maybe this guy didn't need to wait. So if I'm a Texan fan, whether you win a playoff game, whether you ultimately get in or not this year, the future feels as bright as humanly possible, right? Because no state income tax. Here's a problem with the Cowboys, right? Their salary cap is always taken because Jerry's taking. If they ever had salary cap space, everyone would want to go there. The Texans are going to because they got all these guys on rookie contracts. Houston's the city that players are going to like. I mean, they are going to have the opportunity. They still have a draft pick coming from the Browns, who have major issues because of their quarterback, right? So this Texans team, to me, is a team. Maybe not this year. Like, I don't know if they're going to win a playoff game. Not saying that's not possible depending on the matchup, but if you play the Ravens in the first round, in the next couple of years, if CJ just stays around this level, I mean, are we talking about like a Super Bowl contender?
Well, and it was funny because during the off season, and when you're doing June, July sports talk, radio talk, June, July, August, and after the NFL, you got little draft stuff, but and I remember 2 or 3 times I kept coming back to it, and it may have felt like filler, and McIntyre was giving me crap. And I kept saying, is anybody watching what Houston's doing? They're getting all these B players. It's very Parcells. Bill's thing, he would go to Miami. Remember when he was the GM? They went from 1 win to 11 wins in 1 year. And he filled out the bottom third of the roster, like your second back, your blocking tight end, your center. And if you go back and you Google the Texans offseason moves, they were like Dalton Schultz got no publicity. And you're like, comes from a winning culture, right? Like he's going to feel a little abandoned by the Cowboys. So he's going to be a little pissy with a chip on his shoulder with Houston. Like, you're getting rid of me? Look at my production. And so he comes to Houston with something to prove. And they did this very slowly. And then you hit on Will Anderson and Stroud and your coach. And by the way, John, like any well-run business, it gets better over time. They're a much better team today than 8 weeks ago.
Well,
I watched that game today, and my takeaway was CJ's better than Russ, no question. And DeMeco has more confidence in CJ Stroud than Peyton has in Russell Wilson. That was my takeaway watching.
Russell had some moments, I thought, today where it looked a little throwback 2022. He had been playing pretty well, but today was tough. And DeMeco is going to know him well because when he was a position coach and he was with Seattle, like he knows Russell pretty well. And Russell's not obviously athletically, who actually's gotten closer to that guy than he was last year because he's lost some weight. I think when it comes to the Houston Texans, though, forever in that division, it was like, well, Peyton Manning, for 12 years, they were just going to win it every year. Trevor Lawrence is a really good player, but I don't know, if you factor in the contract and you just poll GMs and head coaches, right? Because Trevor, within the year or two, has to get paid. I think most people would take CJ Stroud. And there's an element of Peyton that had that just will to refuse to be denied, and there was an intensity that he's just an all-time football guy. You watch Trevor is he an all-time football guy? He doesn't really feel Brady. Hell, he doesn't feel like Jalen Hurts and Purdy, right? Just his love. He's really talented. He honestly feels a little more NBA-ish. God gave him a lot of gifts. He's tall. He's got a good arm. He's accurate. He can move. But it's is football his everything? I watch CJ. I just watch the Texans play. They play all the guys on the team, starting with their head coach. It is. So if you were just betting on a franchise, the divisions, Tennessee's got a lot of issues, right? Yeah. I mean, a ton. The Colts, I don't even know how they're doing this. I mean, it's pretty crazy because I bet if you texted Chris Ballard right now, he's like, no one saw this coming. And I would say if I'm the Texans, we'll see how Anthony Richardson, he's going to have to prove that he can stay on the field. You'd feel pretty good about your chances to run the division for some years coming up. Because let's face it, one of the Jags' big moves a couple years ago, they had the number 1 pick. Well, Balky tried to hit a home run with the D lineman. If he had taken Aiden Hutchinson, I think we might look at the Jags a little different, right? They'd just be a little more complete. They're just not as good on defense, a little dependent on Trevor, and Trevor can get rattled fast. I would say CJ's best characteristic, pretty hard to rattle the guy. I mean, it really is. I mean, unfazed. He's got that special quality of just Jalen Hurts has it today. Concussion comes back. He's like, this guy just flatliner. Purdy kind of has it. It's a characteristic you kind of have to have, and he has it in spades.
Okay, let's shift to college football. We have the playoff, Michigan, Washington, Texas, Bama. So Michigan is a 2.5-point favorite against Alabama. I would probably take Michigan to win by a field goal. I think the number is right. I think it's very, very competitive. I think Bama will have the inferior quarterback. I think this is the rare instance where Bama has the second most talent. I think Michigan's got an older football team with 3 or 4 guys that could have gone to the NFL came back. I think Michigan's got a complete chip on their shoulder. Now, Saban's been better in bowl games than Harbaugh, but Saban's lost a lot of bowl games too. So let's not kid ourselves. He's not Barry Alvarez or Urban Meyer in a bowl game or Pete Carroll. He's not. I think I would take Michigan over Bama, but I think the number's right. It's a 3-point game. What say you?
Well, I think Harbaugh went to sleep last night and woke up praying for Florida State.
Did you see the reaction?
Yeah, I mean, what would they have been, a 17-point favorite? He was praying, and their team, these guys aren't dummies. So to get Saban, there's an elephant in the room with Jim Harbaugh. He's lost a lot of big games, right? Like you said, Nick's lost some playoff games, but he's also won a few. And he's 11-1 in the SEC championship game. He owns Kirby, who had just won back-to-back national championships. That draw, Saban as the underdog, what did he just have? That's why I loved Alabama against Georgia. It's not like this Georgia team was the last 2 years and Saban gets to play the underdog card. And it's not like he's playing some coach with 3 national championships on the wall. He's playing this guy that's never won a championship. And listen, Michigan's really good. I mean, their guard shattered his leg, who's an NFL player. But if you're going to lose a position, even if he's a team captain, you'd rather lose a guard than a quarterback or the running back the way they play. Listen, Alabama's quarterback, you got to give it. He's improved dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
His ability to make plays just on the move. Obviously, he's got a huge arm throwing it down the field. Bama's defense is pretty good. And let's face it, Ohio State's defense was pretty good, and it was hard for Michigan. So then you factor in Saban's better than Ryan Day. It's just going to be difficult. I'm with you. I tend to just like these 2 underdogs. Yeah. Now, it does feel like Harbaugh, and I'm a huge Harbaugh guy. I've been following him so closely. Honestly, I went to a game with my dad back in 06 or 05 when they played UC Davis, and he was the head coach at San Diego. My dad's like, Jim Harbaugh, former quarterback. His team hasn't lost. Josh Johnson. I mean, Jim Harbaugh dominates wherever he goes, but he's never won it all. And it feels inevitable, right? Like with Andy Reid forever. It's inevitably it does kind of feel like, is this his year? But Bama, given that he could have got Florida State, who's on their 4th quarterback, that's a pretty big swing. Now, you get them. It's not like they're playing this week. You get a month. But I do think it's going to be pretty difficult. I do think there could be a moment, because let's face it, the last 2 years, he got destroyed by Georgia a couple years. Now, that's aged well, that they had 75 pros. Last year was a pretty devastating loss, right, to TCU. That one did not age well. I mean, that Michigan they had the same team. Like, I don't know if they would have beat Georgia, but they definitely should have been able to give them. You can't lose to TCU. So I just think there's this kind of, when I was a kid, Steve Young, get the monkey off my back, I could finally win. Harbaugh kind of has that as a coach. That's the only thing that makes me nervous about him.
I would take Washington plus 4.5 against Texas. They beat them in the Alamo Bowl. I think they can beat them outright. Now, I think Texas has the ability to lean on you a little bit if Texas plays with a lead. But Kalen DeBoer, his teams tend to play well early. That game against Oregon, they were so clever. I mean, they played so fast. I think Washington has an outright chance to win here. Listen, I'm from that area. I looked at their roster before the season, and I said, it's an 8 to 9 win team. They're not spectacular at tight end, running back. Very good O-line, quarterback, wide receivers are special. But the defense has 1 or 2 NFL guys, not deep, not terribly fast at linebacker, just not special. But listen, if quarterback, weapons, O-line, and coaching means anything, and it's about 70% of the game now, and because they lead, they have a good pass rush because they have an NFL edge.
Yeah.
I think Washington has a chance to win here.
I mean, I think, honestly, they could win the whole thing. I think their coach, I was thinking about this last night, really over the last 24 hours, thinking about Kalen. If I have an offensive coach, I want her to be like this ultimate combination of an intellectual, right? Because you're calling the plays, you're scheming the offense, but be a tough guy. It's the question we have with Lincoln Riley. Like, is his ethos tough enough? I'm not saying like they could win a fight. Like, I'm not expecting you to be have to be Conor McGregor here. But like, is the ethos of you as a football coach a tough guy? And you watched him go against Oregon, and Ryan Grubb, his offensive coordinator, who makes $2 million, who Pac-12's dead now, was the highest paid coordinator in the history of the conference because Saban wanted him last year. That guy's a shooting star as well. It's been his right-hand man. Those guys are tough. And they showed up to that Oregon game against Lanning and Tosh, who are tough guys, right? Defensive coordinators, SEC guys, and they shoved him around a little bit. Now, their offense is predicated on the deep ball, but I watch Kalen DeBoer, and I just watch. Remember Tedford in his heyday at Cal?
Yeah.
Like, how's he doing this?
Yeah.
Well, Kalen's a Tedford guy. Chris Peterson, Jonathan Smith, they're all cut from this mold of their offensive minds, but they want to play tough-minded football.
Yeah.
And I just think, listen, Sark, I've historically been a hater. His team's really good. That talent, I mean, I think it's the highest payroll in all college football, NIL money, and it shows. But I'm giving he's 102-11 as a head coach in his career.
It's insane.
I know you're a Brian Kelly guy, and rightfully so, right? From that Division II in Michigan to Cincinnati, or Central Michigan to Cincinnati. Kalen DeBoer's got a similar trajectory of his career. Yeah. I don't care if it's high school. I don't care if it's NAIA. I don't care if it's Fresno State or Washington. He's winning, and he's winning big. And I don't care who he's coaching against. He's beating you. And I think the guy is, if Harbaugh were to leave, if Ryan Day in a year gets fired, I mean, is this guy are we talking a top 2 or 3 coach in the country?
Yeah, Washington has offered him $8.5 million. He wants $9 million. He's going to get $9 million.
Yeah.
No state tax. Washington's got some pretty well-heeled boosters. Think about Washington's history. Every time they get the right coach, Don James, national title. Neuheisel, 1 Rose Bowls.
Yeah.
Peterson playoff. Kalen DeBoer playoff. Like, people lose sight.
It's a great place. It's a great place to work.
The stadium's arguably the best. Again, this is a Microsoft area. There's a lot of money in Seattle. This is a sophisticated city. So he's gonna be in the
wouldn't Michigan though be very, if Harbaugh were to take the Raider job or whatever, wouldn't he be their first call?
I think Kalen DeBoer is the number 1 coach potentially, but I think Seattle's going to lock him up. I think Washington's going to completely lock him up. I mean, listen, if I was a wealthy guy and I could give money to Kalen DeBoer, I would. I mean, that's how it's so special what he's done to the program. And the secret sauce to Washington is Chris Peterson's in the building.
Yeah.
Now, not that Kalen needs an advisor, but Chris is there to sort of synchronize any issues with the program. How good would it be if Saban someday was in the program synchronizing things from behind the scenes? So it's Kalen runs the program, but Peterson, they have a new AD. Jen Cohen did a great job there. Now they have a new AD. It's a grown-up university without any flash.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, he's a Tedford guy. Well, Tedford started Chris Peterson. They're all kind of interconnected. They're all very similar, and they're all elite at what they do. So it's sometimes, you remember when Spurrier would be around, or there'd be a guy and it would make people uncomfortable. Well, if you actually have a lot of similarities and you respect the guy, it works really well. And that's where, to me, the synchronization with the coaching staff, that win on Friday is one of the most impressive college football wins. And I mean, that Oregon team was completely rolling. Washington had been out of sync, and Washington showed up to kick their ass. And Grubb and DuBois against Dan Lanning, who's the apple of everybody's eye, he shoved him around a little bit. And I think Dan Lanning's awesome. That program's going nowhere. Those two teams, the Big Ten, get ready, because you got Ohio State and Michigan 2.0 coming in, ready to roll, and recruiting, especially Oregon. That's the thing. Like, it's going to be easier, right, for Oregon to kind of sustain it because those guys recruit so well.
All right, finally, I don't want to give it too much time. They're throwing a tantrum in Tallahassee. But to me, it's a threefold problem for Florida State. They're on a backup quarterback. You have to consider that. This is a beauty pageant. College football always has been. Secondly, the conference is weak. Louisville's an awful team. Awful. How Louisville's a sixth-place team in any other conference.
They just lost to Kentucky the previous week.
And they got crushed by Pittsburgh. So, and the other thing is, you had an opportunity. I turned that game in to see you play. If you'd have won 42-3, you'd be in. You blew it. You can blame. You can throw a tizzy. You can throw a tantrum. Everybody watched that game against weak Louisville to see how you'd perform. By the way, Michigan was already going to be in, and they didn't play particularly well, but they thumped Iowa. That was never competitive. So in the end, it's backup quarterback counts. Of course it does. Listen, we've only got 4 spots in 5 conferences. They could all go undefeated. We've always known it's a beauty pageant. You're the ugliest team left. Sorry, Bama looked good.
Yeah, I mean, I think fair is the most overrated word in America, and deserved ain't far behind it. I mean, welcome to the real world. They're a 14-point underdog against Georgia. You know, the other reality is, if Georgia had beat Alabama, they still wouldn't have been in. Texas is 3. They would have put a 1-win Texas team, and rightfully so. They would have been a 15 to 20-point underdog against all these teams. This is a television show. And listen, it'd be one thing if they had done it the right way and they had won weird, but their starting quarterback, I would understand the argument, and I think they probably would have got in with Jordan Travis. Here's the thing with Jordan Travis. It's not like they lost CJ Stroud or Trevor Lawrence. I mean, he's a fringe draftable player. So they were, I texted a scouting director who went to some of their games, like, they were barely beating guys when they had him. They barely beat a 8-4 Clemson team. Like, they were holding on. Now, they have NFL talent. The wide receiver's a top 20 guy, the defensive end. But I have no problem. This is who wanted to watch, beside Harbaugh in Michigan, nobody wanted to. It wouldn't have been a fair fight. They would have got killed. I saw Herb Street. All these games historically have been blowouts. Finally, we have 2 games that are, one's a 2.5-point spread, the other's a 4.5, and they all feel. Is this the first time that you can remember that legitimately all 4 teams can win the national championship?
Absolutely.
That never happens. So if Florida State would not only have no chance to win the national championship, I don't think they'd have any chance to keep it within like 20 in the first half. The quarterback yesterday got, give the kid credit. He's a true freshman. What are we doing? The backup was like a 4th year or 5th year senior. The dude that got knocked out the previous week was horrendous. We can't talk about nonstop. The sport is all about quarterbacks, all about quarterbacks, all about quarterbacks. And then you lose the quarterback, and then you lose another quarterback. And you're like, oh, well, it's the resume. Well, none of those guys had anything to do with your big wins. It sucks. I mean, I get it for the players. It would be shitty. Here's the other thing. Get out of the ACC. Haven't they wanted to do that for years? Yeah. I think what's got to happen is, because it's going to get ugly next year when the Big Ten and the SEC get 9 of the 12. So the bitching and moaning is not going to stop. Why don't we all just come under like the AFC and NFC, which is inevitably what's going to happen? I know the television contract in the ACC is a little weird, but like next year, like, how many teams are the Big 12 going to deserve? Right? Maybe 1. So this is the quality of college sports. It's never been that way. That's what makes the NCAA tournament kind of unique, because it's a one-off. But in college football, the SEC and really Ohio State and Michigan, in my opinion, pay the bills for the sports. So, they get preferential treatment.
I remember years ago, I had a speech. Pat Hayden at USC invited me and Tom Brady's agent, Don Yee. So Don Yee and I went, and it was the LA Convention Center, I believe, and there were like 150 to 200 athletic directors. And Don and I were under the belief, Don's idea was privatize football. It's just separate. It pays all the bills, privatize it, and then you have the rest of the athletic department.
Like they wouldn't go to school? Or they would just be basically
you could go to school, but it wouldn't be under the auspices of the NCAA or the athletic. You just privatize it, right? You go to your top 5 boosters, your top 10 boosters, and it's a private enterprise. So it's not under Title IX or anything.
The networks fund it, right?
Yep. Yeah, which is basically semi what they're doing now.
Yeah.
And so an athletic director raised their hand. It was from some small school. What about blankety blank state? It was some small school. And I said, and it was unpopular, I imagine, to a group. I said, what about it? You don't pay any of the bills. I said, if I pay for the wedding, I make up the seating chart.
Yeah.
I'm paying for the wedding. The football pays for everything. Volleyball gets an opinion. You lose money. And it's like for all these conferences and all these people getting, Fox and ESPN, they pay all the bills. March Madness, Fox and ESPN pay all the bills and football. So they get to do the seating chart. So my takeaway is of the 12 teams in the playoff starting next year is that you're going to have, I would say, 4 Big Ten, 4 SEC, 8 of the 12, and then you can figure out where you want them. But it's better football. Like people don't understand, I think you do. Oregon and Washington will be, along with Michigan, Ohio State, that's the 4 best programs in that conference, with obviously the sleeping giant USC very viable. Penn State's also reasonable. But it'll be a 6-team. Those 6 teams will vie every year to get into the tournament. 2 will be left out, 4 will get in. And just like the SEC, it'll be LSU, Bama, Georgia at the top. And then you'll have your Floridas, Oklahoma, Texas. Texas will probably be near the top. And I'm okay with it, John, because, again, they're paying all the bills. They recruit better players. They have more NFL bodies. I don't lose any sleep over this stuff.
Well, in 2 or 3 years, forever it's always been the SEC has produced the most NFL players in every draft. What's it going to look like in 2026, the amount of NFL players coming from the SEC and the Big Ten to the other conferences? It's going to be, the pendulum is going to swing even so much farther. Look at how many guys that have transferred from smaller schools and have gone to the bigger conferences and played well, it changed their life. Jaden Daniels is a good example. No one watched him play. His games were irrelevant. As a player, went to LSU a couple years later, might win the Heisman, become a first-round pick. Cam Ward's going to fall under that. So, and listen, I feel sympathy for Oregon State and Washington State because they did try. Like they really tried. They're just their markets and the way everything broke, they got screwed. And now they're going to go from like 35 million to 5 million. But in the grand scheme of things, no, they don't really matter. Like they matter to me because I've been watching the programs, but no one noticed this weekend. And no one's going to notice next year or moving forward beside people close to that program. Listen, I got my football start at Fresno State. My personal theory, I think a lot of the Mountain West and even potentially some of these teams that aren't able, as realignment continues to grow over the next 5 to 10 years into the one kind of major conference with the 2 separations, I think everyone's essentially going to become like, if you're either in that or you're like Montana, UC Davis, that's what Fresno State and Oregon State, because financially, no one's watching those games. No one's, you can't keep up with the Joneses. I have the thought, like, if you're an assistant coach like Ryan Grubb, the Washington guy, I would only take Power 5 jobs. And I'd only take an SEC and a Big Ten job. I would not take Fresno State or Boise State. I wouldn't even mess with those programs. It's impossible nowadays.
Jonathan Smith leaving his alma mater to coach Michigan State.
Yeah.
Tells you the future of college football. Jonathan, I covered him. Interviewed him as a super smart guy. He left.
See how much money they paid him? Like $7.5, $8 million a year.
Yeah.
Oregon State was going above and beyond, giving them like 5. I mean, they can't. Michigan State is a program in shambles. And they're like, how much you want? We just got a situation with a $90 million coach. We're trying to figure that one out. It's right. The money flowing into those 2 conferences. The NIL, some of these stories I've heard, I mean, the amount of money they have, it's only going to grow, right? So the programs, the moment I want your player, even if you're a mid-tier Power 5 program, I'm Georgia and I'm LSU and I'm Michigan, Ohio State, it becomes baseball a little bit. The Yankees, the Dodgers, they're at such a huge, doesn't mean Tampa Bay Rays, a team can't figure it out, but it's very, very difficult in football.
John Middlekauff, former scout, NFL, Philadelphia Eagles, 3 and Out podcast. Good stuff as always, buddy.
Take it easy, Colin.
All right, man.